Hey, everybody. It's Friday. Actually, no, it's not Friday. Glad you're watching this on Friday, but this is actually our first pre recorded episode of Alumless. So thank you for joining us. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict today. So you were actually watching a pre recorded show, live broadcast on LinkedIn, but we're grateful that you're spending your time with us. Chris Marshall, this is a Chris Marshall Advancement Production, Alumless. I'm your host, Ryan Catherwood, and every other Friday, we try to have a new episode of Alumless. This is episode 5. But of course, you're not here to see me. You're here to see the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Chris Marshall, and we will introduce him in just a minute. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here and have carved out some time on your Friday. Our live show, although recorded this week, is typically 30 minutes long, but we add another 30-minute bonus segment available only on the podcast version of Alumless, which you can subscribe to using Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. And of course, when this is aired on June 10th, as you're watching this, hopefully myself and Chris and our special guest today, John Valva from Oregon State, will be able to chime in and answer some of the questions that you might pose in the LinkedIn chat. So just because we're not live doesn't mean we can't engage with you with respect to this show and even answer some of your questions in the chat. So don't hesitate to leave those comments and ask some questions, and we'll make sure to respond to you. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Chris to the stream. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, Ryan, how are you, man?
Very good. I say it's happy Friday. I guess I said it's not Friday, but it is Friday. We're recording this actually a week. Right? It's a week ahead of time. It's actually Friday, June 3rd, as we're recording this. And you and I are going to be on site together, actually with a client here in Virginia, when the show is airing live next week. So we thought it would be a good idea to keep our consistent streaming of the show every other Friday, but try to do it a little differently and pre-record the episode. But so how you doing? What's shaking up in your world?
Coming off Memorial Day, which was nice. Took some time out. Was good. Had a trip to client down in NC State, down in North Carolina. We'll talk about that in a little bit at the end of our session today. And I have to share with the audience and you, Ryan, I had the single worst travel flight experience of my 600 travel flight.
And you've had a lot of travel experiences, yeah.
It was a nightmare return trip. It was supposed to take 5 hours, and it took close to 25 hours when it was all said and done. So, but I've survived it, and I'm ready to go for this conversation. Excited. Should be fun.
That's awesome. As you work with clients around the country, we often find ourselves working with foundations, alumni associations that are in various states of merging together, trying to, if not fully merge, at least try to speak as one voice through more focused collaboration. Is it fair assessment to say that's one of the biggest kind of trends out there right now, is this merger between alumni associations and foundations? How would you sort of describe what we're looking at these days?
Yeah, 100%. I think it is a trend. I'd put it on that list, high on the list of things that we're seeing recently, and I think we'll continue to see. It's part of what schools are moving towards, and more increasingly so, a integrated advancement model. Whether you're in a legal structure that's merging or just a philosophical approach to having alumni engagement be more directly connected to other outcomes, including fundraising, unapologetically, is part of the work that I think we're going to see more and more happening around the country. And the piece that I'm sort of passionate about is the fact that I don't think this means it's the end of alumni engagement as we know it, right? People, the fear of this for many people, talking to me about fundraising, talking to me about money at the end of the day. I don't buy that at all. I think there's models that work. I've seen them work. I've seen some of the best programs in the country and very integrated models where alumni engagement is paramount to the. It's part of the goals. It's part of the plan, and as an outcome, we want alumni to be engaged so that we can deliver value to them, but also use alums to help move the institution forward in lots of ways, including fundraising. And I don't think we should be hiding behind that any longer as an industry. I don't many schools have already done this, and to some folks watching this, it sounds like, what am I talking about? But there are still places out there where they're separate, and that move means something significant too. certain
Yeah,
institutions.
and so, why do this? What's the point of the merger, or the synchronization, and what are some of the friction points out there that exist? I think you sort of alluded to a little
Yeah.
bit, which is the being afraid that the whole point of engagement is going to be about philanthropy, but isn't the merger kind of about ensuring stronger connectivity between engagement strategy and raising
Yeah.
philanthropic dollars?
Yeah, yeah, and other outcomes that we can talk about are, can alums be involved in helping recruit or get students, the best students, to say yes to us in the admissions process, from a yield standpoint? There's alums who can be involved in mentoring students and making sure kids are staying in school. Retention can be impacted by alums. Alums can impact, internships and career and job placement kinds of outcomes. Again, one of them is fundraising, and I think some of the friction points we see, if I had to boil them all down, I'd say it comes down to control and maybe institutional culture, sort of cultural entrenchment, maybe, because there's certain ways that we've done it for a long time, and to do it differently means letting something go, giving up some control, and trusting in something else, and that part can be hard. And those are the ones I see sort of tripping people up along the way. But lots of folks have done it, and I think, keep seeing more.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely part of the conversation, and many of the partnerships that you and I have worked on together, and I know it's been part of what you've worked on for the last several years. Well, obviously, we have specifically organized the show to ensure that we have a great guest that can chat about this particular topic and others, of course. And everybody knows now who we are featuring this week. And we'll bring John to the front here in just a second. But we decided to have our special guest this week no longer be a surprise. And I think, we are always so excited about who we have as a special guest that we want everyone else to be as excited as well. So let's go ahead and bring out our special guest today in 3, 2, 1. Here he is. Hey, John Valva, how are you?
Good. How are you, Chris? How are you, Ryan?
Yeah, good, John. Good to see you.
Greetings from the Willamette Valley.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking before we hit the record button about what a beautiful place to live it is in the Corvallis area. You said sort of nestled between farm valleys and wine country and within 35 minutes to the ocean or something like that. And I was like, wow, this sounds idyllic.
Nobody in Oregon wants anybody else to know that, though. We love our little lives here.
So if you heard that, don't visit.
You
that
can visit.
area.
You
Okay.
can visit. Buy our wine.
That's right. Buy the wine. Well, John Valva, of course, is Vice President and Executive Director of the Oregon State University Alumni Association, which is part of the Oregon State University Foundation. At least I think it is. And John can share more about the exact kind of alignment there. Interestingly enough, prior to joining Oregon State, John worked for the University of California Office of the President as the Executive Director, Alumni Constituent Affairs. And that, of course, was a role that our guest last week, Patricia Nguyen, was. And so we have a really interesting context. We can talk a little bit about that role for University of California system impacting your work at Oregon State, and maybe even touch on some of the work Patricia's doing. We'll probably hit a little bit more on that in the bonus segment of the show, which of course all you listeners will want to tune into by listening and subscribing to the podcast. But so first off, John, maybe you can share a little bit more about the alignment there at the Oregon State Alumni Association. Is it part of the foundation? And what has that meant for leading alumni engagement at the university?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I've quickly become a devoted follower of this series, and I'm thrilled and honored to be part of it. It's good to see you both. And to all of you online, please don't let their choice of me this week dissuade you from watching in the future. Trust me, the other people are going to be a lot better, but hang on for about 22 more minutes. So I want to make sure that we focus a lot of our time on the content and the outcomes that Chris was talking about, but we can spend a minute on structure, particularly why I think what we're doing here to make structure work. So briefly for context, yes, at Oregon State University, the structural model is the Alumni Association is part of the self-governing foundation, which has a legal relationship with the university that makes us responsible for all fundraising and almost all constituent engagement. And in return, the separate but very closely integrated foundation and alumni association commit that all of our outcomes, financial and otherwise, directly support university priorities and initiatives. Functionally, what does that mean? Functionally, that results in a mostly centralized operation. We don't have units elsewhere on the campus doing what we're doing. It's here. That's directly forwarding the university's mission priorities, but we have the benefit of autonomy of a private business management practices, like investment strategies, business contracting, HR, things like that. Although I started my career at Cal in a self-governing alumni association, this is the first time in my 25 years in this industry that I've worked in this exact business model of a self-governing, holistic and integrated advancement shop. And I love it. For the most part, I think I feel that way because how it's managed here and who I work with, but we can get in a little bit more of that as we go. To your question, what this means to our work is our staff and our work processes are held to the standards of professionalism and outcomes you more often, frankly, see in private industry than sometimes in higher ed. And more importantly, the obligations committed back to the university requires our daily focus to be on delivering impact of the institutional priorities, not just in our self-preservation. They set the priorities, we manage the work. Many, I guess, can say that. At OSU, we translate that to mean our engagement does and must support donor pipeline development. That's cool. That's part of our job. But if we do our job thoughtfully, we are also proactively inclusive in whom we serve and engage, and how those relationships, in addition to the donor pipeline, also support student alumni careers, legislative and community-based advocacy, the academic research and service mission of our land grant status, and in ensuring that OSU is diverse, inclusive, and welcoming. We have here, using both data and storytelling, proven that engaging alumni directly in a university priority outcomes both delivers that alumni expertise and connections that we all think are really important. It also statistically increases the alumni propensity and frequency of giving. We've proven it, and we see it as a win-win.
I love the comment you made, Ryan, if you don't mind, real quick.
Yeah, please.
I see a lot of these alumni associations out there that are in business to sustain the business of the alumni association. Yet when you look at their documents, their founding documents, it's to support the mission of the institution. And that gets lost in the how do we stay alive as a separate entity? And you just eliminate that with the structure you just talked about. So
there are some resource allocations that are necessary to have the privilege of saying what I just said.
Yeah,
Chris.
I get it.
Yeah. And so historically, I mean, Chris and I entered this field at a time when self-preservation was foremost, really. And we have parts of our operation that have self-generating revenue that we feel that way about still. We have an alumni center, that's the convention center for the region. It's fantastic. That is our primary self-generating revenue model. I need that to be self-sustaining. I need that to be at the forefront of our work, but it doesn't mean that that's all we care about. It means that is funding a resource for us. Credit cards used to be like that, things like that. So you use the self-preservation as a resource to do the real work, in my view.
And along the way, in this sort of new model at Oregon State, has there been a lot of friction? Have you experienced where have been the growing pains, I suppose?
Yeah, well, let me just say that the merger itself predated my arrival here. I've been here almost 4 years. The hard work was done by my predecessor, Kathy Bickle, and the CEO of the foundation at that time, Mike Goodwin, a legend in this business, and his successor, and number 2 at that point, Sean Scoville, and the university leadership, and most importantly, the alumni board and the alumni staff that worked with the foundation staff to make sure that the dots were connected and aligned. So that's hard work, and they did it. I was brought in after the formalities were done and given the luxury of saying, all right, now make it work. Figure out what resources and such this does. So I'm in a lucky spot. It works here, but I'll also tell you that Chris knows this about me. Others in the industry that know me know this. I'm very direct, and so I'm just going to say it. I don't think government structure is that big of a deal. I think there are many ways to run this business really well. There are many ways to screw up this business terribly. And often governing structure is an excuse one way or the other. I grew up in a self-governing alumni association. I've worked and integrated my job in the UC system, worked with 10 different campuses with 10 different models. I have a little bit of perspective on this. And my perspective is what matters is alignment to priorities. What matters is properly resourcing, properly staffing, having fervent alumni that you engage in things they want to engage in, but you have the nuanced ability to channel that into something that the university needs. These are things that can happen under any structure, any structure. So when a new president or chancellor comes in and he or she thinks this is the only way to do it, fine. Alumni directors tend to stay around longer than they do anyway. And so the structure matters less, the alignment matters more. So with all due respect to the excellent work that you do to help people think through that, I think and it's needed. I would suggest that the important work is how it supports alignment, how it anticipates the effectiveness and efficiency of resources. So in our case, it was primarily done for two reasons. There are a lot of business redundancies, data management, data back-end office input, HR, accounting, marketing and communications, the integral support of this work. If you've got it in an alumni operation and you have it in a foundation operation, you've got some redundancies that you're potentially wasting some resources on. We effectively fixed that mostly.
Right.
And that way, more of the resources in one shop can go to the outbound work. That's the reason to do it, not because people want control or anything like that.
Yeah, efficiencies, right, or redundancies. It makes a ton of sense when you look at the big picture. Chris, as you're hearing John describe, the situation at Oregon State, how does that kind of compare with other institutions you've worked with in terms of the challenges of figuring out this type of merger?
Yeah, I love the way he framed it. And at the end of the day, the average alum, frankly, doesn't. I mean, John, you're candid. I'm candid right back. The average alum doesn't know or doesn't care about the structures that we create internally, right? They just don't. And I'll give you an example. So, John, when Mike actually had Mike Goodwin, so Sean's predecessor, Mike, you mentioned, brought me and Andy Shandlin in to help Kathy think through this work at Oregon State specifically. And so here's the formality that you mentioned. It had to go to a statewide legal process vote to determine if this could happen, this legal merger. So 180,000 people, something like that, had to be notified that this was going to happen. We needed a vote on whether or not it should. And John, did you ever hear the story on how many actually showed up to vote?
Oh, I don't think I know that. No,
it's like 30, and the vote was 29-1 in favor of doing it.
I know that one.
Of course, you know the one.
I'm sure you do, right? But the point is, of course, is that most people don't know or don't care. And it's not about the structure, right? It's about what it does to serve. When you talk about priorities, it talks about we think about serving the priorities of the institution. What are the goals we're trying to help support? And so Ryan, back to your question, this is the exact thing we're seeing across other institutions. And the person in the Sean role now, previously Mike, and in the John role and the Kathy role, how entrenched or how staunch are they going to be in keeping the structure the way it was, or doing what makes the most sense to support the priorities of the institution is really what it boils down to. And so we're seeing it again, time and again. And one other factor in here, of course, is, John, you know this very well, you mentioned it in your comments, is whether or not you have an alumni board, your volunteer leadership supportive of potentially moving into a new direction.
So here's what our board cared about. That's a really big point.
Yeah, it is.
We had the luxury here of still have a good amount of reserves. Back in the glory days
Yeah, I
of
remember that.
credit cards, almost all of those funds
Millions.
were
Yeah.
invested. And until the last maybe 6 weeks, that portfolio keeps going up. So and we have strong parameters of how to spend it. Our board cared deeply that investment didn't go away, but instead continued to be an important resource for our future and our growth. And Mike and Ed Ray, our president, and others, that was never in doubt. This was never a resource grab, ever. That matters. That's not true everywhere.
Yeah, you're right.
And we cared about the ability to remain publisher of the Alumni magazine. We cared about the ability to retain the importance of the convention center that we run.
Right.
There were certain negotiables that our board was firm on. We were not particularly as much into how we do the work, who on staff does the work, as much as understanding our priorities, understanding the end goals. And then it was a lot of work then to pull that together. And we're grateful that Chris and Andy were part of it.
John, you were not long ago searching for your new magazine editor. Is that still open, that search?
We are final interviews next week.
Okay,
today, as a matter of fact, today that we're recording, June 3rd, is the official final day of Kevin Miller. Fun fact, 66 years we've had 3 alumni editors here.
Yeah, I knew that. That's amazing.
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
So no
and
pressure.
He's great. Right? He's one of the best in the business. Yeah.
Yeah, our magazine is fantastic.
So too late to plug anybody to apply for the position. But John, if you have any other openings, now's your chance to put it out there. Let us know.
Digital engagement. We're bringing back regional. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, we've got, and I don't know about all of you out there in the lands. We can't get students to apply to our part-time student jobs. Some of the unexpected impacts of COVID or things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah,
John, let's talk about some of the things you're most proud of in the last 4 years. You talked about the Alumni magazine, which sounds like a really fantastic publication. What gives you the most pride when you think about what's been accomplished over the last few years?
Anybody worth their salt in this business does it to be inspired by the people we work around. Truthfully, these jobs are awesome. I'm working on a college campus. We've got robots delivering food all around. It's the coolest, cutest thing I've ever seen. And if you don't have them at your university, you should get them. We're working with students and amazing faculty and doing amazing research and teaching. And Orange State's a special place culturally. People love it here. Corvallis is a quintessential small college town. In the Western United States, there actually aren't that many of those. Many of the Research One universities are in big cities on the West. It's not like the South or the Midwest. So people love it here. People retire here after they've had their career somewhere else. It's that type of little town. So Beavers engage with Beavers as Beavers. That's a special culture. So last night we had hundreds of new grads. Graduations next week. Largest graduating class this university will ever see. Many public universities are saying that. Our student enrollments are increasing. And we're connecting them all to jobs, and we're connecting them into when they move to a different region that there's still some alumni around there. That's the part of the work that, that never goes away. That's just magical when you can make those personal connections. It's that for me.
And when you think about the accomplishments you'd still like to make over the next few years, what's at the top of your list? And then as you think about what might prevent you from making those accomplishments, sort of the micro or macro factors that will dictate whether you're able to be successful, what do you think about there?
COVID changed everything, truthfully. And so shame on me. 23 years into this business, I thought I knew a little bit about it. And 2 years ago, suddenly the game changed 100%. And realized really quickly that our model of mostly in-person engagement was incredibly exclusive. The only people that could really fully engage with the university were those that would and could show up at a given place, location, at a given time on a given date. That's not particularly the most inclusive way to run a business.
Yeah, right.
And it's
And yet
expensive.
that's how we all did it, right?
Yep.
And so suddenly, overnight in March of 2020, we were one of those schools. I'm incredibly proud of it. We pivoted within 10 days, and suddenly everything we had been planning went digital, almost without skipping a beat. We had a captive audience that was reeling and home and discovering many of them Zoom for the very first time. And we took full advantage of that. And our engagement was stronger that first year, numbers wise, than it had ever been before. The second year has been a bigger challenge because we're in and we're not. And so the blend of that work combined with the fatigue of Zoom, knowing that people are indeed willing to come back. Here's the breaking point right now, the tipping point right now, and it's how do we embrace that inclusive nature of no matter where our alumni are and where they are in their life, they can be engaged with us, and still we bring back folks that are willing and able and available to come in person. That balance is still a puzzle piece we're working out. I'm proud that we've got a team that is working on that, and it's fun to do.
I think you're exactly right. That is the balance that everyone is trying to figure out, and what is the technology that should be deployed to get to that future state of balance. I think are all really interesting questions. Chris, we like to talk about trends here on Alumless. Before we sort of conclude the live portion or the live broadcast of the show and go to our bonus segment with John, the idea of merging alumni associations and foundations in different ways really is one of those predominant trends, I think it's fair to say. But on the flip side, is there a rationale for keeping alumni associations and foundations separate? I mean, we talked a little bit about that power dynamic, right? I suppose that's the thing, right? Is maintaining that power.
Yeah, and John mentioned this too. The structure is less important, I think. But I think if you had to pick reasons out, I'd say there are probably some legal ones out there. There's certainly financial ones. John hit on those dead on. I mean, it's a really important one. PR is a big one. Public, the PR of dissolving an alumni association. That's not what we did here, but that's how sometimes it gets communicated. And alums, how could we ever think about that? But I'm going to keep it quick here, Ryan. Generally speaking, I personally believe that the best structure to get at the support of the institutional priorities is in an integrated model. What legal layer you put across that is, it almost doesn't matter. But I think having an integrated approach to the work that we do, an advancement overall, is going to get us to the goals of supporting institutional priorities better than anything else. And again, remember, we talked about this. At the end of the day, these are things that we talk about on these things, right? The average alum could care less about this stuff. The structure doesn't matter at all. It's the relationship they have with their alma mater, and hopefully we can get at that point with their connections they have at their institution. So alum to alum, alum to student, alum to institution are the most important things and all that. But how do we make those relationships so that the alum gets value out of continuing it, but the institution gets value out of it as well? And structure is less important. John,
I agree with all of that with one caveat.
Go.
And if the merger means alumni engagement is just basically an annual fund sales development operation, you are very short-sighted and you've missed it. And we have all seen operations where it became that.
Yeah, you're right.
What that means is you forget those other outcomes that come along the way, and you forget the ability to nurture people to start giving even more that we were talking about earlier.
Well said. Glad you added that.
Awesome point. And we're going to have more with John Valva in our bonus segment here that you can listen to through the podcast edition of Alumless. But we're about to conclude the LinkedIn live portion. Obviously, this streams too on YouTube, which if that's your preferred place to view content, then please check us out on YouTube. But Chris, I thought it would be good if we announce our next guests, in the middle of the previous show, get people excited. So before we leave the LinkedIn live and head over to the bonus segment, why don't you tell us a little bit about who we're featuring in 2 weeks?
Yeah, talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Brian Sisko from NC State. He's the vice chancellor for advancement at NC State. A real great dynamic leader, just concluded a $2 billion capital campaign, has some really interesting thoughts on alumni engagement. And they're in the middle right now of searching for their new alumni leader. They've actually made the decision to combine alumni engagement and annual giving under the same associate vice chancellor. And they're down to the final rounds of interviews right now. So we'll be in 3 weeks from today, when we're recording this, Brian may have some interesting stuff to share. So I'm looking forward to having Brian on the show.
Fantastic. All right. Well, for those of you who are watching us on LinkedIn, have a great weekend, and be sure to check out the bonus segment with John after we can publish it early next week. But thanks a lot, and so long, everybody.